My husband passed on a Tuesday in February, and by the following Monday I was back at work. Not because I had to be, not entirely anyway, but because the silence in our house had a weight to it that I could not carry alone. His name does not matter to this story. What matters is that for 31 years, he made the coffee every morning before I was even out of bed. And when that stopped, I did not know what to do with myself before 7 a.m., so I found somewhere to be. I'd worked as an administrator at a legal aid clinic in Hamilton for nearly 2 decades. Small office, mostly immigration cases and landlord disputes. The kind of quiet, careful work that does not make the news but matters enormously to the people sitting across the desk from you. After my husband died, I applied for a night shift position at a different office downtown, a larger firm that needed someone to manage intake files and correspondence that came in after hours. It paid slightly less than I was used to, and my daughter thought I had lost my mind. "Mom," she said on the phone the night I told her. She had moved to Vancouver with her husband 3 years earlier, and there was always that slight distance in our calls now. Not emotional, just geographical. "You're 62 years old. You're going to take the night bus home alone." "The LRT," I said, "and I'm 63. She went quiet in the way she does when she is deciding whether to argue. I took the job. The office was on King Street West, and my shift ran from 9 in the evening until 2 in the morning, Tuesday through Saturday. Not glamorous hours, but I like the city at night. Hamilton is different after 10 o'clock. Quieter, but not empty. There is a particular kind of person out at that hour. Nurses finishing their shifts, delivery drivers, the older men who walk their dogs when the sidewalks are less crowded. I felt like I belonged to something, even if I couldn't have explained what. I started taking the LRT home around 2:15 most nights. Same route, same stop, same walk to my building on the north end of Barton Street. And for the first few weeks, I sat in the back and kept to myself the way you do when you are new to a routine and still figuring out the rhythm of it. That was when I first noticed the driver. He worked the late route on Tuesdays and Thursdays consistently, and occasionally Saturdays when I assumed his schedule shifted. I never learned his rotation exactly. What I noticed first was that he always said good evening to every single person who got on, not as a script. He meant it. There is a difference, and most people can tell. His name, I found out eventually, was written on the small placard near the front of the cab. Winston. I never called him that for a long time. We didn't have conversations in the beginning, just the good evening and the nod I gave back. It was my daughter who changed things, indirectly. She had sent me a tin of Earl Grey from a small tea company in Vancouver, a birthday gift that arrived 2 weeks late because she had sent it to my old address first. Good tea, proper loose leaf, the kind you steep properly and do not rush. I started bringing a thermos to work. It helped with the long, quiet stretches after midnight when the emails slowed and the office got cold the way old buildings do. One Thursday in October, maybe 6 weeks into the job, I boarded the LRT at 2:18 with my thermos still half full. Winston said good evening. I said it back. And then, for a reason I still cannot fully explain. Maybe I was tired, maybe it was the particular loneliness of that night, I stopped beside the partition and held up the thermos. "Earl Grey," I said. "Would you like some? I have an extra cup." He looked at me for a moment, not suspicious, more like he was deciding whether I was serious. "I would, yes," he said. "Thank you." I poured it into the small plastic cup I kept in my bag. He took it at the next red light, and that was that. The following Thursday, I brought enough for 2. It became a thing. Not a big thing, not something we spoke about directly. But each Thursday, and sometimes Tuesday, I brought 2 cups worth and we exchanged maybe 10 minutes of conversation total, spread over the length of the ride. He told me once that he had driven this route for 11 years. I told him I had lived in Hamilton for 28. We talked about the neighborhood, about whether the new development on James Street was going to change anything, about a fire we both remembered from years ago near the escarpment. He asked about my work. I told him what I could, nothing confidential, just the general shape of it. Legal aid, late nights, a lot of paperwork that other people did not have the hours to handle during the day. People need someone to keep the lights on, he said once. Even at 2 in the morning? I thought about that for longer than it probably deserved. I did not tell him about my husband, not for months, but I think he knew something had shifted in my life recently. There is a quality to recent grief that people who have experienced their own can recognize even without being told. Winston had that quality of recognition. He never pushed, he never asked. He just continued saying good evening, taking the tea when I offered it, and keeping the conversation at the level I seemed to need. That winter was a hard one, not unusual for Hamilton. The escarpment funnels the cold in a particular way, and the wind off the lake can be brutal in January and February. I started wearing my husband's old wool scarf. It was too long for me, and I had to loop it twice, but it was warm. I remember the night I am going to tell you about was in late January, a Thursday, the kind of cold where the city feels smaller because everyone is moving faster, hunched into their coats, not making eye contact. The night had been unremarkable at work. I had cleared a backlog of housing case files, sent a dozen follow-up emails, and made 2 pots of tea because the building's heating system was running behind. I left at 2:10, maybe 2:12. The street was nearly empty. I boarded at my usual stop. Winston said good evening. I handed over his cup and settled into my regular seat, 3 rows back on the right side. We had been moving for about 12 minutes when I realized we had passed my stop. I was looking at my phone, checking a message from my daughter about her upcoming visit, and when I glanced up, the intersection was wrong. We were further east than we should have been, and moving. I stood and walked to the front. "You've passed Barton and Sherman," I said, not accusatory, just stating it. Winston did not look panicked. He looked careful. He pulled into the next stop, which was almost empty, and turned to face me fully. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you not to react loudly, because I do not want to alarm the other passengers." There were 2 other people on the LRT. An older man near the back reading something on his phone. A young woman in scrubs with her eyes closed, probably coming off a hospital shift. "All right," I said. "There's a man who lives on your floor," Winston said. "In the unit next to yours, or close to it." I felt something go still in me. "His name I don't know," he said, "but I have seen him on this route. He rides it the same nights you do. I have noticed him watching where you get off. Last Tuesday he followed you off the stop. He did not follow you into your building, but he stood at the corner and watched until you were inside." I sat down. My legs made the decision before my brain did. "You're certain?" I said. "I would not tell you if I wasn't." Winston was not a dramatic man. In 6 months of Thursday conversations, I had never heard him exaggerate or embroider anything. When he said he was certain, I believed him. "He is not on the LRT tonight," Winston continued, "but he was here Tuesday. I have been thinking about what to say to you since then, and I kept putting it off because it is not a comfortable thing to say. Tonight I decided I was done putting it off." I looked out the window at the street. The cold had emptied it almost entirely. "What does he look like?" I said. Winston described him. Medium height, late 40s or early 50s, a gray winter jacket with a reflective strip on the sleeve, dark knit hat, usually carrying a backpack. I knew who he was immediately. Not his name. I had never asked, but I knew his face. He had moved into the unit at the end of my floor about 4 months earlier. I had seen him in the elevator twice. He had never said anything threatening. He had barely said anything at all. But there had been something in the way he looked at me that I had filed away without knowing what to do with. The feeling women carry quietly year after year. That small calibration we are always making. I don't know his name, I said. You do not need to tonight, Winston said. What you need is not to go home alone. He drove me to my daughter's friend's place. I had a number in my phone for her, a woman named, well, I will call her my daughter's friend, because the specifics matter less than what she did, which was open the door at 2:45 in the morning without asking any questions and make up the couch with a spare quilt her grandmother had sewn. In the morning, I called my building's property manager. I also called the Hamilton Police non-emergency line. What I learned over the following 2 weeks was more than I expected. The man at the end of my hall had a prior study order, not a conviction, but a documented incident from 3 years earlier in Brantford involving a woman he had fixated on following her divorce. He had moved to Hamilton not long after that situation was resolved. He worked night shifts at a packaging facility near the industrial park, which explained why his hours matched mine so closely. He had found out about my work schedule. I still do not know exactly how. I had mentioned my hours to the building superintendent once in passing when explaining why I sometimes came home at 2 or 3 in the morning. The superintendent was not malicious, he was just careless. The property manager moved quickly once I provided what I knew. There was enough documented history that the building was able to initiate an early lease termination on the basis of conduct that violated the tenancy agreement. My daughter, when I finally told her the full story, did not say I told you so. She just booked a flight. She was here within the week. We sat in my kitchen and I made the Earl Grey and she cried a little, which she would deny if you asked her. My daughter does not like to be seen worrying. She gets that from her father. I went back to work the following Tuesday. I took the LRT home at 2:15. Winston was on the route. I got on, said good evening, handed him his cup. He accepted it the way he always did. We were 2 stops from mine when he said quietly, "They moved him out last Friday," I said. He nodded. That was all. But I'd brought something else that night, a small container of shortbread I had baked over the weekend, the kind with a bit of lemon zest that my husband used to make every Christmas, and that I had finally attempted on my own for the first time. They were not perfect, a little uneven, but they were close. I set them on the ledge beside his partition. "My husband's recipe," I said. "I've been working up to making them." Winston looked at them, then at me. "They look good," he said. "They're all right," I said. "I'll get better." We rode the rest of the way in the comfortable silence I had come to rely on, more than I had admitted to myself. The city passed by the windows, cold and lit, and going about its business the way cities do, unbothered by the small dramas that take place inside them. At my stop, I got off. I turned back once before the doors closed. "Good night, Winston," I said. First time I had used his name. He smiled. It was a real one. I walked home on a street that felt, for the first time in a long while, like mine again. I think about that sometimes. How a small kindness, a cup of tea offered on a cold Thursday night, made me visible to someone in exactly the right way, at exactly the right moment. I was not looking for protection. I was not looking for anything really, except a bit of warmth on a long commute home. But I believe now that the way you treat people when nothing is at stake is the thing that determines what they do for you when something is. You cannot calculate it. You cannot plan it. You can only try to be decent, consistently, without keeping score. That is the only thing I know how to say about it that feels entirely true. Be kind, not because you expect the world to return it on schedule, but because you never know which ordinary Thursday will turn out to matter. I've turned that Thursday night over in my mind more times than I can count. Not the frightening part, the part where I was standing in the aisle of an LRT at 2:30 in the morning, realizing someone had been watching me come home. I have thought about that too, of course. But what stays with me more is the smaller moment before it, The one where I held up a thermos and asked a stranger if he wanted tea. That was it. That was where everything began. I did not do it because I expected anything. I did it because the night was cold and I had more than I needed, and it seemed like the decent thing to do. That is the whole of it. There was no calculation involved, no sense that I was making an investment. I was just a recently widowed woman on a late bus trying to be a reasonable human being in a world that does not always make that easy. But I have come to believe that decency accumulates, not in any mystical sense. I am not talking about fate or cosmic reward. I mean something more straightforward than that. When you treat people with consistent respect and genuine attention, you become real to them. Not a face on a bus, not a routine passenger, not background, real. And Winston saw me clearly enough over those months of Thursday conversations and cups of Earl Grey that when something was wrong, he noticed. He noticed because he had been paying attention. And he had been paying attention, I think, because I had made it easy to. That is what I mean when I say decency accumulates. There is something else I have thought about which is harder to articulate. Winston did not have to say anything. He could have reasoned that it was not his business, that he had a route to finish, that he might be wrong and cause unnecessary alarm. Those would have been understandable choices, but he chose the harder one. He waited until he was certain, and then he spoke. That took a kind of clear-eyed courage that I do not think gets named often enough. The willingness to act on what you know even when it would be easier not to. I spent most of my working life in legal aid. I have seen what happens when people do not act on what they know, when they look away because the situation is uncomfortable or complicated or not technically their problem. The cost of that looking away lands on someone, always. It landed on me once, in a small way, when a superintendent mentioned my hours without thinking. It might have landed on me in a much larger way if Winston had decided his route ended at 2:45 and nothing else was his concern. I came out of all of this changed in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who has not been through something similar. Not fearful, less fearful actually than I expected. What changed was something quieter, a clearer sense of what I want to carry into the years I have left and what I want to put down. I want to keep noticing people. I want to keep offering the extra cup when I have it. I want to keep being the kind of person who makes other people real and who stays real enough to them that when something matters, there is someone paying attention. That is not a small thing. That might be the whole thing. Be kind without keeping score. Pay attention without expecting to be thanked for it. And when you know something that someone else needs to hear, say it, even when it is uncomfortable. Even at 2:30 in the morning on a cold January night in Hamilton. Those are the things this story taught me. I am still learning them.